welcome to this very special show where we assess the first 100 days of this government. The questions that we're asking: have economic fundamentals really changed in the last 100 days of the Modi Sarkar? How has the government fared in its battle against inflation? Should one forget about the big bang reforms? Because the government, after all, is fixing the micros to improve the larger macro picture. The question then, is that the right strategy? To discuss and debate all of that on the economy scorecard of the Modi government, with me, Supriya, Shrinate, I've got three very special guests. Dr. Bimal Jalan, former RBI Governor, Jahangir Aziz of the JP Morgan, and of course, Professor Bibek, Debroy, ET Now's consulting editor. Thanks very much, each of you, for being with us. I will begin my questions with Dr. Bimal Jalan. You've seen many a government come in and go in your tenure, first as the RBI governor, as the banking secretary, all your various avatars. Let me ask you, the first 100 days of this government, the question is, have economic fundamentals changed in the last 100 days?
Absolutely. I mean, we are in a much more positive frame of mind, and positive also on the ground, and positive in terms of the statistical data that you are seeing. So yes, I mean, there is a much greater confidence in the investor community, and I hope it would all be realized. But these are early days. 100 days are 100 days. That's it. I mean, but we have to wait and see how it unfolds.
Wait and watch, and it will perhaps be an optimistic watch. But Mr. Aziz, if I may throw this at you, are we seeing the first few signs of a cyclical uptick in the economic fundamentals here in India?
I would say, look, the economic fundamentals had been improving, and I think probably this reflects the efforts made by the previous government in consolidating the fiscal deficit, in controlling the current account, and actually getting a sense of economic stability back into India. Much of that probably owes to the previous administration's last 8-9 months efforts, as well as that of the RBI. I would also think that the improvement in the global environment had a big role to play in it.
Absolutely, the global environment cannot be no longer ignored. But Professor Debroy, which side of the debate are you on? Are you as gung-ho as Dr. Jalan here, or are you cautiously optimistic, perhaps too early to celebrate just yet?
I would still say it's a little bit too early, because we still don't have sufficient evidence of investment intentions actually becoming investments. So I would say that I would prefer to wait for one more quarter before one says that the economy is definitely on an upswing, by which I mean GDP rates of growth that cross, let's say, 6%.
All right, one quarter more for Professor Debroy before he calls it, before he decides to uncork the bubbly. But Dr. Jalan, if I may come to you, you spoke about positive sentiment, you spoke about optimism. When does this positive sentiment really change into tangible numbers? How much more time really?
No, give it at least 6 months. Planning, targeting. And for example, I mean, if you want to build a new plant or something, it would take at least 6 months of doing the work on the ground. Should I set it up here, or should I put it up there? What should be the kind of equipment that I need, and how do I raise the funds, and all that. I mean, so give it at least 2 quarters.
The reason why I'm going to ask you my next question, Mr. Aziz, is because the first quarter GDP growth at 5.7% has made some people go gung-ho. But the question is that if the government intends to stick to the 4.1% fiscal deficit target, the fear is that the government will have to prune its spending. A large part of the 5.7% is on account of government spending. Do you fear that happening?
Our sense is that if you look at the full year budget and, forget about all the policies, etc., just on the numbers, tax revenue is expected to grow around 20%. Now, that looks a very, very difficult target to reach. Let's say tax revenue is slightly less if you're generous, let's say it's about 15%. At 15%, the fiscal deficit would be higher by about 0.2-0.3% of GDP. In order for that to be met, my sense is that either you could go in for higher privatization, which seems unlikely. So really you're back again doing what we have seen governments do in the last 2 years, which is to tighten spending at the last quarter of the year, which is the first quarter of 2015. Will it impact growth? It will.
I'm going to take a cue from you and talk about spending, and with who better than the Expenditure Management Committee's Chief Dr. Jalan himself. But before I do that, Professor Debroy, if I may throw this to you, in hindsight, do you believe it was an error on the judgment on the part of the Finance Minister to go and stick to 4.1% fiscal deficit target when he actually had the elbow room? The markets would have forgiven him if he had set himself a higher target.
Well, obviously the Finance Minister took a call. And I guess the call was that a wider fiscal deficit would have led to negative reactions, including on the part of the rating agencies. My call always has been, my belief always has been, that because growth requires the public expenditure, because growth requires the plan and the capital investments, he should have had a larger fiscal deficit of perhaps about 4.5% of GDP, supported by a credible medium-term fiscal policy plan of reducing that. So that would have been my take. But obviously the Finance Minister had his own reasons for taking the call on 4.1%.
All right, that hasn't happened, but we'll take the spending question to Dr. Jalan here. Dr. Jalan, what do you believe? What kind of elbow room does the government really have to cut expenditure? You're going to be someone who's going to be giving his suggestions to the government, perhaps setting the roadmap for it.
No, I think there is a substantial scope for reducing and managing expenditure, which would give you significant savings. In the sense, for example, this is not our work. This is the work which was done in 2004-2005 by the Planning Commission to give 1 rupee of benefit to people below the poverty line. We are spending 3 rupees 65 paise. Now 2 rupees 65 paise is what? That is administrative expenditure. If you have diversion of which is 48% of food grains from what is the supposed to be transferred to the poor, if and corruption and so on and so forth, then we have a problem. And we have to handle it at the root.
On that note, I think I'll have to take a quick break here on this show, but I come back and discuss the all-important battle against inflation and the mess in the banking space. Stay right here with us. Back with us right here on the Economy Scorecard as we discuss and debate the government's ambitious divestment drive, the banking sector, inflation, growth, all of that. Let me begin with revenues. And Mr. Aziz, if I may throw this to you, divestment is something that the government has very ambitiously planned. FPO norms are being changed. They are leaving no stone unturned as far as garnering revenues from there is concerned. But so much of government paper is going to float in the markets. Is there appetite for so much government paper?
Look, depending upon what kind of companies the government is willing to bring on the anvil. If they are bringing in profitable companies which have a tested history, my guess is the market will absorb it. But my sense is that the government really needs to strike while the iron is hot, and this is really the time when the government needs to go in, and if it wants to divest, privatize its assets, this is the time to do it. But if you look at the actual privatization program, we haven't really seen any new large public sector enterprises being brought onto the anvil.
Privatization isn't a word that Mr. Modi likes, at least that's what we've been given to understand, but that debate is for yet another day. Dr. Jalan, if I may throw this to you, you've been at the head of the RBI. You've also been the banking secretary. The kind of mess in the banking space that one has seen in the last 100-odd days, coincidentally with the tenure of this government, do you believe these are aberrations here and there, or is there a systemic risk to bank? Are you concerned about this?
Of course. It's most important to have a strong banking sector performing well, and I hope we will pay the maximum attention to that. And you can't fiddle with banking regulation, banking rules, leave it to the RBI to decide.
Professor Debroy, do you really believe India's banking system is at systemic risk and these are not really aberrations? There is far too much concern that one needs to give as far as banking is concerned?
At one point in time, we had a very clear distinction between banks and development finance institutions, and the development finance institutions used to lend for the long term. And then in the course of the reforms, we blurred the difference between the two, and banks have now begun to lend for long-term projects, not just working capital. And some of these projects are definitely going to be unviable in the short run. So I think while I agree with what you're saying, I would also say that part of the problem is due to the fact that we have not been looking at infrastructure projects and how do you fund infrastructure projects via the debt route, because equity has not been forthcoming in situations where that project will require 10, 20 years of funding.
Let me just step back on that banking space and actually ask you the question, Mr. Aziz. The whole question is that populism, one thought, will be far reined in this government. It hasn't been. How do you explain the Jan Dhan Yojana, for instance, and then labeling commercial banks to do something of a social obligation in that space? How justified is that?
So there are 2 points to be made over here. One is a general perception that, this government was expected to be very different from the previous government. Now, that was something that we inferred, we being we in the market, the public inferred. If you look at what the government in its pre-election and in its budget and in its Independence Day speech has been saying is that they haven't really talked about a new articulation of what they think should be the the trajectory of India's, what should be the new policies, what should be new reforms. They haven't really said that, the reason why India's growth has plummeted and inflation went through the roof, or current account was pushed to a point where India was facing a balance of payments crisis almost, was because the previous government had wrong diagnosis of what was wrong with India and therefore, implemented wrong policies. All that they have been saying is that India's woes is because of dysfunctional decision-making, dysfunctional implementation of policies. And therefore, what they have focused, what they promised in the pre-election, campaign and in the budget and in the Independence Day is better implementation. And I think, while we in the market inferred that they would do a lot more than that. So really, I don't think the fault lies with them, I think it lies with us. But more to your specific point about getting, public sector banks overburdened with social responsibilities, I think there's a grain of truth to that. Financial inclusion is fine. I think we've been talking about it for the last 15 years. Doing that by actually changing, as the RBI had proposed, the universal banking license to allow for having specific payments banks was probably the right way to do it.
Fair point indeed. Let me go back to the very, very crucial subject and discuss the battle against inflation. Dr. Jalan, do you believe the government is close to winning this one?
No, inflation, there is an uptick on inflation. Part of this is food issue, and hopefully with a good monsoon, good food production and good output and that we will be able to control inflation and, within reasonable sort of zone. It may not be exactly 4.5 or 5%, but if it comes down to 5.5, I think it's very reasonable.
So food inflation is the biggest enemy, according to Dr. Jalan. But Mr. Aziz, how do you assess the war against inflation? It's a very concerted effort from the government and also the RBI. How do you assess that battle being fought?
So this is one place where I think that if there has been one single reform that has been done in India over the last 100 days, this has been the one. That, it was almost like a throwaway line in the budget where Finance Minister Jaitley said that our Reserve Bank of India needed a modern monetary policy framework. We all thought that was a euphemism for inflation targeting. What we didn't realize, and we were again very, very pleasantly surprised, that in the first policy review just after the budget, that's exactly what the Reserve Bank said. That they, for the first time ever, at least the first time ever that I have been following the Reserve Bank of India, which is, almost like 7-8 years. The Reserve Bank of India categorically stated that their interest rate policies would not be guided by what happens to monthly inflation. Indeed, they are going to be only swayed only if their medium-term inflation target of 6% by 2016, if that is breached in one direction or the other. I think this is as close as we have ever gotten to formalizing inflation target, and this is the only real chance we ever have given ourselves to breaking the back of inflation. And this is a true, real reform that's happened.
All right. A true, real reform according to Jahangir. Aziz, still an uptick according to Dr. Bimal Jalan. Professor Debroy, let's hear it from you. The battle against inflation, is the government close to winning this one? Which of these two gentlemen do you agree with?
There are very few short-term fixes to address the inflation issue. Yes, you may do various things with the food grains you hold in stocks, etc., but fundamentally we've got supply side problems. One of the reasons why the inflation numbers, not the only one of the reasons why it's looking a bit respectable is because of the base. Now, whether the inflation rate, let's say retail inflation rate, whether it is 9% or whether it's 8% is one thing. But as a trend, inflation will continue to be high because demand is high, and that I would say is a desirable thing. Therefore, until the supply side problems are addressed, and many of those supply side problems, particularly on the agro side, involve the states, I don't think inflation as an issue is going to go away. All that will happen is that the numbers will look a little bit more respectable.
All right, the numbers may look respectable. You rather much agree with Dr. Jalan. But on that note, I'll take a quick breather here. I come back and discuss CAD. It has come under 2% of the GDP. Time to put the foot off the pedal as far as gold curbs are concerned. I also come back and discuss the reform agenda. Are the days of big bang reforms over in India? Back in a moment. Great to be back with you once again on the Economy Scorecard right here on ET Now. Dr. Jalan, I'm going to begin this segment with you because the current account deficit is well below the targeted level for this fiscal. At 1.7, it's quite comfortable. Would you believe it is perhaps the right time to put your foot off the pedal as far as gold import curbs are concerned? It's down substantially, over 58%.
I cannot specifically say about gold, but I would say yes. Now we can take measures which can increase the import of essential products or products which are desirable from our point of view, for which there is demand, and gold is one of them. So yes, we can relax now.
All right, Dr. Jalan says we can relax now, but I saw you, Mr. Aziz, nodding rather disapprovingly. Take it away.
No. That's a pretty clear answer, no. And the reason why it's no is because, look, if India actually is to go out of this 4-5% growth rate back to, let's say, a 6-7% growth rate, given the fact that India is a supply-constrained economy, necessarily two things necessarily will have to happen. One, India will have to import a lot, and B, India's own resources will be under serious pressure, which means that core inflation will rise and current account deficit will rise. So if one really cannot think about India going back to a high growth path without going through a phase in which core inflation picks up as well as the current account deficit picks up. So if in this situation the government goes and eases the restrictions on gold imports, my sense is that you are going to see the current account deficit ballooning up like it did back in 2013, and rather than getting on a path of sustained but slower growth, we might just end up again precipitating another balance of payment crisis-like situation. So I really don't think that the government should remove those restrictions, because there is it is almost inconsistent to think that India can actually grow at those levels without a much higher current account deficit.
All right, hold your horses, says Jahangir Aziz on that one. But Mr. Aziz, I'm going to stay with you and talk about the last theme, which is really reforms. You know, one was given to understand there'll be these big bang reforms. That isn't happening. What the government is really doing is trying to fix the micros to perhaps make the macro picture look better. Is that the right strategy? Are days of big bang reforms over?
But again, I'm going to go back to the point I was making earlier. This government, in its pre-election campaign, in its statements since taking over power, has never promised big bang reforms. It has never been the case that they have gone and said, look, this is going to be a transformative change in India's economic policy and economic structure. They have never said that. They have been very consistent in saying, look, we think that the reason as to why India's growth and India's fortunes faltered over the last 3 years was because of very dysfunctional policy making in Delhi. And we are going to correct that. And that's all that they have actually done, is to take small tactical steps in actually trying to bring back a sense of governance back into India, which presumably did not exist or had faltered or had depleted over the last 3 years.
Professor Debroy, if I may throw the same question to you. When this government came into office, expectations were really high that there will be these groundbreaking reforms that have been in the pipeline for so long. But what they're essentially doing is they're trying to unclog the system. They're trying to fix the micros so that the bigger picture starts looking better. Are you a votary of that strategy?
Well, I think attitudes of people who propagated big bang reforms also have probably changed a little bit post-budget, because many of those reactions were to the budget, not per se only to the budget, but also to the budget speech. And after that, at least my diagnosis is that reactions have become a bit more favorable. Now, so far as Big Bang is concerned, it depends really on what one means by Big Bang, because it's one thing to have Big Bang for the external sector, which is entirely or largely the government in Delhi's domain, and it's a completely different thing to suggest Big Bang for areas where the states are the main players. So one ought not to expect a sudden scrapping of Chapter 5B of the Industrial Disputes Act or repeal of all the labor laws. Those expectations would be unrealistic. I think by and large most people would now recognize that what is probably happening is this particular government, so far as Finance Minister is concerned, has decided to wait till the next budget for pushing through things like GST and DTC. And I think when most people now talk of Big Bang reforms, they don't have in mind FDI in retail. What they're probably really talking about is the GST.
Actually, besides the GST, the one big bang reform that the government is trying to bring is recasting the Geriatric Planning Commission, and who better than Dr. Jalan to ask that question. Is that the right thing to do, restructure an organization which has perhaps outlived its relevance?
Well, I don't, it needs to be restructured and reformulated. But whether you may name it whatever you want to do, but you need a commission of the type which can coordinate among ministries at a political level to take a decision making. I mean, you can go to the cabinet for final decisions, but if decision making process has to go to 6 ministries and 7 ministries, 8 ministries, you need a body which can bring the ministers together for discussion, for coming to an interministerial decision on what we regard as priority, and whether it is called something else, and then you have to monitor what the progress is being done on the ground in terms of delivery of services, in terms of delivery of capital projects, I mean, where we are very deficient. So, I mean, all these things, all the priorities need somebody to monitor interministerially what is being done and what is the outlook and what we can do to make things better on the ground.
Fair point indeed. I'm completely out of time here on this very special show, the Economy Scorecard. Dr. Jalan, Jahangir, Aziz and Professor Bibek, Debroy, thanks to each one of you for being with us. And you, the viewer, thanks very much for staying with us to assess the first 100 days of the Modi government as far as Indian economy is concerned.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.